It should be live pretty soon. Because eating ice cream. Alright, now it's good.
You said you're gonna eat your hot Cheetos.
I was.
So we're on now, right?
Yep.
Okay, welcome to Moot Pod. Yes, we
Yay.
are our episode one of our commentary
Uh-oh.
segment. So what this is going to consist of is we're going to go through basically controversial takes we found throughout the media. That includes social media or actual takes that we published in say newspapers or online journals, places like that. And we're just going to go through and discuss them. Hopefully in the future, I guess some of our plans might even be to include some of your own submissions. Of course, you're free to just message us right now and send any of those if you'd like to. So yeah, we'll get started. Okay, so first, let's start. We're going to talk about this. So yeah, I'm sure a lot of you have already heard the news, especially college-age people, which are probably going to consist of perhaps our entire viewing base at this point. But yeah, international students risk being deported. First thing first, I did want to mention that. So what's happening basically is that international students that are in the U.S. on student visas risk being deported. Of course, I don't think this applies as much. Of course, these people were already, though, at risk of being deported during the Trump administration for, say, green card holders, permanent resident. But this applies strictly to people who are on visas. So, yeah, which primarily includes, like international students, people who are studying in other countries. But they also not only might risk being deported, or they might be risked, or possibly both, being refused renewal to continue working here, continue studying here if they don't attend an in-person class. And so the alternatives are either they have to go for a new university in another country, which doesn't have a law like this, might be usually probably their own be easiest, or enroll in an in-person class. At least, they have at least one in-person class. One thing I did want to note actually with this is apparently this law has actually been around for a while. I think it's just been activated because of it's kind of relevant given the circumstances. But it doesn't seem like there's much of action being taken against this law from the Trump administration. And given some of the stuff he said in the past, especially about like Chinese international students, it seems that there's reasons maybe he might actually, like very much support this, even given the circumstances.
Well, it's the same sort of power that existed with DACA, also with border crossings. Like, I know the
Same kind of
popular,
sentiment.
yeah, that's the popular thing is like, oh, well, Obama invented the way to detain children, but that was also through, you know, kids showing up on the border without their parents. In this case, they were taken from their parents, and sort of
Yeah.
reappropriation of how this law should have worked. But then,
Yeah.
well, whereas the Obama administration actually attempted to, if they could keep them in America, they would leave them there, or actually send them back to their parents. They would figure that out. The Trump administration just figured, we're just going to leave them in indefinite detention as a sort of deterrent, as if
Yeah, and
that's
plus, like the
good.
political situation in Mexico has definitely changed greatly, in like since the beginning of the Obama administration. Not to mention that, um, the not to mention also that, like, given the current circumstances, clearly, like a law like this. If you cared about like international students and their rights to like study here and continue education, then like you wouldn't want to continue something like this. Because when they made this law, they weren't considering circumstances like this, and like yeah, I honestly, does anyone know like where this, like when this law was originally introduced? I just know it came from before this administration, but I like don't actually know like.
Well, I mean,
I don't know, but I think it's because they want to like prevent international students from taking advantage of like those online classes that.
Yeah.
which we're all on.
We're all on online at this point. Yeah, that's the point though. It's
Well, really, what
like we're online because there's an epidemic. This is not really like. Yeah, yeah.
was cutting out a bit, but
when this law started coming out, but I do know it's like it shouldn't be strictly adhered to like at a pandemic where like you have no option but to stay indoors and to attend online classes.
Yeah.
I think that's like one of the things I have a problem with like ICE is that there's like no area for them to kind of be flexible on. Like it's just really like black and white, and you can't really like work around it. And that's kind of like problematic, especially for institutions that are like really profit based, like higher education institutions. And I think that's what gets us a lot of the revenue too, especially like COVID-19 has like shut down a lot of businesses. Like we're kind of in a spiral to like a smaller depression era. Recession, yeah. So I think like the businesses we get from international students are crucial to keep our economy going. Doing so is only going to hurt us in the long run, and I think like even like the higher institutions are taking like action against us, like specifically MIT, John Hopkins is like trying to is actually suing ICE for
enforcing it,
adhering to this policy.
They're trying to file lawsuits against it. I mean, against the United States government. I think that it's I think like what was I about to say? Yeah, I think I completely understand why they're doing that, and the reason why is because I think that this kind of actions. I mean, I think some of the actions that the government's taken against coronavirus has already kind of led to this, but definitely like this. Like it's definitely decreasing the number of probably international students who are going to want to go to the United States for higher education in the years to come. It's definitely also like decreasing the prestige and sort of like the
security.
Yeah, exactly. For like these, and that's why they're like I'm seeing increasing number of people saying they want to go to school in like Australia, Britain, or like in China or like Singapore or something, because they'd rather go there if like the United States is like is going to be like hostile to like international students coming here and going to make it really hard for them.
Which is again like this being like particularly a policy that's being enforced by Republican administration. They're so concerned about our economic growth that they want to make sure that we have no people coming to universities internationally, adding to the American economy who would work in the American economy. Like it doesn't make any sense.
They want to stay here, a lot of them too. I mean, here's I think back when they made this law about like people being deported if they're not doing in-person stuff, I actually I mean, this is sort of a devil's advocate position, but I sort of actually understand the sentiment in the sense that they didn't want people from just random places around the world just like taking resources and not actually giving back to the economy because they're not actually being enrolled. They're just like taking things online, like in random places and stuff. But like we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's very different because like the students here actually like they don't have a choice. Right? I mean, they're already here. It's not like, and I think the main sentiment which a lot of these people had when they originally introduced these things was like, they didn't want people basically who were just taking the resources and not giving back to like the United States. But at the same time,
arguably they do give back.
They do give back, exactly. They don't notice the part they're giving back, and plus like the number of people who want to come here eventually. Like their goal is they want eventually they're having education here with the goal of eventually like attaining citizenship and anyways like staying here and contributing like a lot like to our country.
That would be a fun factoid about how much revenue is actually generated in the United States from international students. Which I just want to throw out because I think there's also more about a war on education. I mean, Trump also had the tweet where he wanted to make sure if schools didn't reopen, then they would take away funding. Or I think actually that tweet was about just getting rid of funding from universities in general because they became institutions of leftist, Marxist fear-mongering, and that's somehow not important. Or reading books somehow does that to you. I mean, tell that to the economic students who are somehow all Republican, or the coding students who don't touch a lick of Marx their entire experience,
or coding students who are like super like I guess like reactionary and have like a lot of like issues. Like STEM's filled with like so many issues, like
or medical to, like, students. Like how it's totally just a crazy sort of ideological hatred of the educated that Trump wants to lean into.
Well, they think that elitists like represent sort of like something like that, and the only place where I see any validity in that is with some elements of the liberal establishment who's kind of concerned with like virtual signaling sort of in a way, and sort of like you were mentioning Bernie's like sort of was like virtual signaling Christian, I remember in the chat, and like sort of like trying to signal virtues but really like not seeming like they care so much about like certain working class individuals in the United States.
Yeah, ironically, like, which is a Marxist take of those elites with their capital to go to universities, but I guess Trump's the Marxist he doesn't like.
It's just I think I think it's I went to UC Berkeley, and even despite going there, I mean, I can say that in like all the humanities classes and stuff, like of course some of them they read like say like the like works of like Marx, you know, for instance, or Engels, but like they treated them more as like, okay, this is another piece of academic scholarship. They absolutely should. I mean, it's like reading any other philosopher, even if it's not something that you agree with or something that you really ascribe to, then you should still understand it and you should still read it because it's such an important like thing to understand, and it's an important philosophy. Those are important philosophies and political ideas to understand, just because they're the foundations for so many important civilizations, and it's important to have a very like open view to these, because like I mean, and that's kind of goes in line with I think what I often say is just like if someone has like an opposing viewpoint, even or something even you don't feel like you agree with, you should try to understand why you don't agree with that. You should try to understand why they agree with that viewpoint, because that's very important. I think it's very important to understand your enemy's argument just like your own, because in that way there's not only ways you can counter it, you understand what's really wrong about that, right? If you know if that's not something you agree with, but also it allows you to maybe rethink maybe hey, maybe there's actually a lot more truth to this than I realized. I should just be more open to it.
Even conversely, as another recent graduate from a university no one would recognize the name of, studying literature, we had to study a lot of, you know, English literature had many themes that revolved around biblical narratives, particularly in medieval literature, say like Marie de France, say like Chaucer. These are very, Christianity is very important to these things. So we essentially had to have an education injected with Christian theology to sort of justify our education. I mean, if I'm studying politics, like of course I'm reading Marx. Arguably, Marx does show up in some literature classes, which is kind of injected depending on the professors. I mean, we can have another discussion about how Marxist professors actually are, how much they want to shove down our throats, particularly. But I mean, if you don't know what they're talking about, like I'm reading Marx, I'm reading Das Kapital right now. I'm not suddenly becoming like, oh, we need to destroy America. I mean, that's kind of the perception that people have. But
we need to take down the upper class and turn the means of production.
We gotta guillotine all the rich people because that's how France figured it out and then got Napoleon.
Hey, by the way, those people who think Napoleon was all great and represents like some of the peak of like European militarism, you realize like he very much respected the East Asian countries, all of you people who are like, oh, I don't like you're all like so negative about like, and you're being like xenophobes and stuff. Like, you realize like, I mean, like those leaders you looked up to, they looked up to those places. Like, so I think it's ridiculous. Sorry, big tangent. But...
in those international countries, yeah. But as far as education, I mean, how much? On that topic, at least, there's to fixate on this. Mico has something to say outside of her ice cream and Cheetos.
Yeah. So I think one of the most important things about like what's going on is that like there's pretty much no alternative for international students other than to basically either take a in-person class, which isn't really going to happen for most majors, or like for the upper division people. They don't really have any in-person classes that are mandatory for their for their majors. For example, like the humanitarian majors, like there's not really a lab class or anything they can take. So their option is to either take a in-person class or to try to find another university at this time and transfer or something like that, which is pretty much impossible.
Or you could probably do it, but your education's gonna be ruined.
Yeah, and it's kind of like they're other than those two options, they're not really given much. So hopefully, we'll see ICE come out with more clarification as to like maybe like providing a more flexible opportunity or option, but right now so far that's like the only options that they have, which is
I've actually two words of optimism actually though. Optimism as in first one is actually some universities such as Berkeley, they have students as well as administration are trying to push for in-person classes, which are really easy. Literally it's just like people come there and meet like once a week or something and just talk about something or like discuss things. I know at our school, fortunately, Berkeley has a decal program, and the decal program basically is a program which you have student-led things. And like basically students can create their own courses as long as they're approved by administration. And so one of my friends is actually helping to start a bunch of these decal things specifically for international students. And so what they would do is they would meet right outside, I forgot which building, and just as like a group of like I think 15 each or something with social distancing, of course, and they would just be there, I guess, for like an hour, 30 minutes or something. And this is a way to bypass. I mean, that's an in-person class, right? And it's an option, I guess. And so I know some universities are trying to do that to bypass it, alongside, of course, doing lawsuits and things like that. That's by the way, which I think people are sort of finding loopholes with these kind of laws, which that's great. I'm glad they're doing that. I guess another thing too is though, consider it's like there's so many international students in the United States, like it's going to be really hard for them to deport that many people if they really tried to. I mean, it really scares me though, considering what I've seen ICE do. It's just like they could already like, and even if they do it to a few, that's already really terrible. But at least like it makes you wonder they might have to change the law because it's just going to be too many people.
I mean, like outside of deporting people though, like what about the international students that went home for the summer?
Yeah, that's right. A lot of them can't even return. Like, what are they supposed to do?
And they can't enroll in classes if they don't get their like F1 visa. So
yeah.
But even if you're like, if you were a senior or a junior or second, third, or fourth year, in those cases, like, what your education is severely impacted. Like, particularly, you have to have a certain amount of credits to graduate from universities. Like, that's a great impact on someone's life. Like, they spent so much money to get the education, and now that's just out the window now, and they can't do anything about it, which is an injustice in of itself. And again, this goes back to the fact that they paid so much money that it doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, we want to have all this value in our economy. We want to have a strong workforce. A lot of these students who end up getting educated end up working in America and adding to the surplus value of the United States of America. I mean, there's really no economic argument that makes any of this make sense, particularly if you even want to leave the situation that we're in.
I mean, there isn't an economic argument. There's a legality argument, which I guess the right would argue for. It's just like laws that you have to follow. Otherwise, like, things will fall out of place.
But then it's like, why do we have the law? It just seems like the law is there for the law's sake. Like, there's no justification, there's no ethics, there's no measuring of the impacts on people's lives. Just sort of, well, it's a law. That's sort of like the argument that, well, I wish immigration was easier, but unfortunately our laws are this way, so that's just how they wanted it to be. It's like, well, don't you know what democracy is? Guy?
Yeah, they're like, look at the amendment. It says this.
What's that response? Like, I mean, someone made
the law says this, so that's why you have to follow it.
Someone made the Chinese Exclusion Act, so that's just the law. I mean, that's just how it is. Like, buddy, dude, what country do you think you live in? What is the democracy? Like, these people don't even know. This is why people want Trump to have like unlimited terms in office and pretend that they respect what the founding fathers wanted. Right. Oh. I mean, I think the most problematic thing is what does it say about who can be in America right now, especially when Americans are causing the most damage with Corona. I mean, I don't know if this is a point to be talked about later, but with Disney World reopening, like the profit motive to keep people going places, the posts about people going to parties and then getting sick and dying like a week or two afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, if this is about the danger of COVID, like there's like Americans are the biggest enemies here. I mean, everyone's trying to get away from us. I mean, American passports only allowed in like under 30 countries, like, and maybe even under 20 at this point.
Europe, like, literally, like, stopped immigration or, like, stopped us from...
The entire EU did, yeah. Literally, and I think most of Africa did, most of Asia did. I mean, yeah. I think the only place...
That was hilarious.
Wait, what were you saying?
I can't believe I forgot about that. Like, I should have put that in, but I forgot.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, we were kind of making fun of that article, but it did have some truth in the sense of, yeah, people want to get away from Americans at this point. Like, we're a danger to the world, if anything. That's the way And
What was the next slide?
it's about okay, so moving on to the next point we're getting to.
Short slide, right? That next
Mhm.
one. Oh no, that's not a short slide.
Oh, case of hanging suicides.
Yeah, so we wanted to talk about, basically there was a number of Black people who've been found hung, and there was already a few cases, especially
You should show the names just so we
Yeah.
can.
right there. Yeah.
Unfortunate.
Yeah. So I mean, the details. Police
And
rules.
so I know that,
I was gonna read it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, these are all across the United States, various places where there have been Black people found hung. And they're saying it's suicide, the police are, but it's an interesting string of cases all of a sudden.
All of a sudden, there's nothing, no correlating factors
Mhm.
at all. Particularly, I mean, it's one of those. As much as the Black Lives Matter protests were everywhere, and I know it gets a lot of criticism for, everyone just suddenly forgot about it. It was like this thing that happened for 2-3 weeks, and now it's just part of history now, and we all experience that together. And to some merit, it seems like how much can people hear the same story over and over again? Which, I mean, is also just a question as to how we more effectively engage in activism. But in this case, I mean, this story being the way that these hangings have been presented have been, to a degree, not very proliferated. I think I see this more on Twitter. I personally, I don't like engage and watch CNN too much. I mean, I get my news from like magazines that I buy, but
CNN has some Beatty articles, I'll be
I mean,
honest.
they do. I mean, of course they have Beatty articles. I'm sure Fox does too, but
Yeah, well, Fox has even more, I think, but CNN definitely is not guilty of that.
yeah, but it seems like with the type of stories, particularly the topics that are being discussed, it's hard. I don't know why this isn't more of a topic. I think part of the issue could be that they, in a manner, can come off as being unconnected if they're happening all over the country, but that would also be incredulous to the moment that we're in and the dog snore.
Well,
mhm.
I mean, going back to your first point, yeah, I guess it's easy to say that these somewhat correlate, but I wonder if like the amount of like hangings that happen, because suicides are actually much more common than people realize, makes me wonder if like this is not anything like necessarily out of the ordinary, like this many Black people happen to be hung like during this month. Because don't forget, if we go back, I'm gonna go back to the slide and share this. Like, let's look, like these cases. I mean, these probably weren't the only cases in this time, but I mean, don't forget, this is
There's
like
plenty more sadly.
this is a month. Yeah, but there's plenty more, but it's like a month-long period. I mean, I guess there's plenty more, but like, I guess I haven't seen this. That's why I'm asking. But I guess one thing which is important to ask is like, is this any more statistically significant than how much we usually find? And I'm sure, of course, in the past, there's going to be plenty of like these are racially motivated. And that is, I think, a big issue we could have. But like, yeah, I mean, also I guess don't forget that during this time, like, it's a very stressful time, especially for BIPOC. Like, people could be like, they could be committing suicide, but as a result of like racial tensions. I mean, like
public. I mean, that's not. I feel like that's the.
There's things not related. It's not necessarily true, but like, what were you saying? Sorry.
I was gonna say. I mean, that's sort of the spin that people generally have an inclination to commit suicide, but being hung from a tree in public is not a manner that's typical of people committing suicide.
Yeah, so I think like the stance that you and Jonas took, kind of saying that it could be suicide, is kind of interesting because I do not think it is. Like I might be on the more like assumptive side, or presumptive side, where I think like this might be something else that isn't suicide. Just because we do, like, the United States itself like has a history of like lynchings happening, and the police not caring or investigating enough
is very common. Yeah, that happens all the time.
And especially like right now with police brutality and stuff going on, more issues coming to light about how like the police isn't really like take into consideration like minorities or take them more seriously, which is going to be like another slide we're going to be talking about later on about how they don't really prioritize certain types of groups of people. And I think like this is just another case where the system doesn't really like, pay attention or like want to pay attention to minorities more so than people who the system have been built to protect. And so I think some of these cases, the weird thing that Christian mentioned was like this suicide from a tree. Like the tree thing is a key concept around.
Well, it's public too.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like a key concept around U.S. lynchings, and so it's like a weird place to kind of suicide. And also these people, I read articles on like what their families have said and things like testimonies, and a lot of them have said that they're normal people who don't have depression and any reason to kind of do things like that. You know, like
normal people don't get depressed.
I mean, I think one thing I guess that's valid, but I agree with the sentiment though. I definitely think that I would be very skeptical of them ruling this as a suicide, because even like setting aside like the fact that the police tends to be like overall in a systemic scale very biased against very certain certain minority groups, and I mean most of them as a whole. I mean, I think that also, don't forget that with suicides, it is not very often. It's not infrequent where someone commits suicide and nobody had any idea they had any like issues going on. So like, don't forget like that. I guess that's not necessarily evidence of like they had committed suicide. Here's what I'm trying to say though, is I'm not trying to say like I'm more like inclined to think it's suicide. Actually, I'm very much skeptical of that, just like you are. I think I just didn't want to make an assumption without there's some more data that I kind of thinking about, like increased number of suicides. That's all. I mean, like it's but and I'm also skeptical as well, very much. And so I think definitely this is something we need to look in more. We can't just let this go and say, okay, it's a suicide. The police said so. I don't agree with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are asking the police to do more and more investigations.
Sure.
Who was in California? Robert Fuller, right?
Yeah. Well, he was one. Not only was he in California, so Malcolm Harsh, I think, was further in the valley. I think, down, like closer to like urban areas. But Robert Fuller's out in Palmdale, and I know, since I don't live too far from Palmdale, and I know people who live there and stuff, they have actually a pretty significant white nationalist activity there. Like there's a Aryan like Brotherhood like branch, and I think there's like skinheads and stuff who live up there. And so I wouldn't be surprised. Like there's enough activity there with like white nationalists. I wouldn't be surprised if one of those groups could have been involved in this. It happened in Palmdale.
And
I know
white nationalist activities there.
Yes, exactly. There is out there, and even out where I live in Santa Clarita Valley, there's some. Although I think Santa Clarita Valley has just a more issue with just general white flight conservatives. I mean,
yeah, that's really interesting, especially in a place like California, right?
Yeah, but that happens. I mean, because you get very concentrated areas like that, such as Orange County or Santa Clarita Valley, Palmdale, those areas, because it's like basically, is like a lot of conservatives got to move in those areas because they don't like the diversity, and they don't like they don't like the diversity in like the inner city areas and like all the like more recent immigrant groups that have come, people moving elsewhere. So I told you the white flight phenomenon. I mean, it's pretty well discussed, especially in California.
But I think another important theme is just, especially stories like this, just the distrust of the police. Like that's a consequence of everything that happened, particularly of the recent protests and riots, is that people just can't just take the police's word for it. I think especially when we have situations like peaceful protesters getting attacked by police, but then we have these people protesting wearing masks and they're not getting beaten. It seems like that there's a sort of motivation for their behavior, that they're actually acting on their offense, that they know that they're protesting the police, that the police are actually going to smack them around because they're given that sort of authority to do so. So why trust? Where's our trust anymore? And the sort of pitting of the black community or this social justice on one end and the police on the other, it has been toxic. I mean, I don't know how to somehow change that or integrate people or pull them in, and now suddenly the police in the United States of America are some of these social justice warriors who care about all this stuff. But that's just an observable issue, and that should probably necessitate that there should be some. The police have some value to gain from earning their trust back.
They should, and they should realize that. They should realize. I think a lot of the police forces probably just feel like people want, like they're emphasizing the really extreme cases, like they'll emphasize like the police officer who was hit like by a brick and died or something, or they'll emphasize like, hey, there's these people saying that they want to completely disband all law enforcement and have everyone take care of themselves with guns or something. And like I think they don't realize that this is something which, if they really cared about the community and their people, like they would realize that these reforms are these reforms are absolutely necessary. And they would realize that this is like, if they really cared about the communities and they were there to serve them, they would realize that this is what the communities want. Of course, a lot of them would say, oh, this is not what the communities want, but a lot of times it's because they're not actually listening to, say, the right people, or the people who really need that help.
Mico's there. Did you get like a hamburger?
I got pot pie, but it's in the oven.
I
Baking in the oven right now, or is it done?
It's still baking in the oven, so I just put away the ice cream.
Why did you have so much food?
Because I'm hungry. I didn't eat all day.
Oh, okay.
I don't have that much snacks at my house, I'll be honest.
Confederate statues and racist statues are being taken down from all over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, a lot of statues are coming down all over the country. As you can see, here's some recent posts that Baby Azula found from some guy who really hates leftism, or he really hates leftism. It's trying to decide between saying does he really hate leftism or does he really hate leftists? But I think it's a bit of both.
Wait,
y'all can read this.
Oh, okay. I know Charlotte Clymer. Charlotte's not roasting it. He's probably the one. He only killed a few million people, but at least he wasn't racist. Am I right? Oh yeah, Stalin. So they didn't take down Stalin. Why in Seattle, right? Why does? Oh no, it's Lenin. I don't know. I knew it was Lenin.
Wait, okay, but here's the thing. Lenin wasn't the one who killed a few million people. It was Stalin, technically.
Yeah, I guess that was even where I made that mistake.
He was a philosopher. I mean, the state was to the point where literally, like, if you were supportive of, like, say, like, Trotskyism or something, you were, like, thrown out from the country and you were, like, either killed. Like, honestly, like, a huge number of those people who were killed during, like, those first years of Stalin's reign. What was it? What's the term they called that period? The Great Purge, I think, or what was it? Basically, where they purged a bunch of people who were not, like, specifically like Stalinists, right?
Yeah, I mean, why
the Great Terror?
I mean, if we're going to evaluate the statue of Lenin, I don't know where he is. I didn't know about this statue until people complained about it.
I knew about it because I lived in Washington. So
because you lived, so people in Washington probably know about this particular. Do you know why it's there? But, it's like by like a university or something.
I looked it up a long time ago. I can look it up again right now. I do want to say something slight about the tweet, though. I don't think the fact it's private property really should be relevant. I don't see how it's relevant here. I mean, if it was a really bad statue, say like someone had a statue of Robert E. Lee in their yard, I think people had every right to take down the statue. I mean, they don't have a right to like destroy the person's house, but at least take down the statue. I don't think the fact it's private property is necessary.
Wait, Jonas, you want to take away the slide just so we can?
Yeah.
Well, I'm so interested in the slide. I mean, it's also like statue of the Ulysses S. Grant and Gandhi. I know there's also conflict with Gandhi. I believe that was an African university. I believe like Gandhi's opinions of Africans was pretty negative. I mean, obviously that's probably where the sentiment's coming from. But frankly, I mean, I wasn't too familiar with that one. But Ulysses S. Grant in San Francisco. I mean, Jonas as a someone who's closer to San Francisco, when you're Berkeley, was there any negative sentiment about Ulysses S. Grant, a general in the Union military?
Not really. Some people were saying some minor things, like he said some small thing, or he did some thing against. I think some people were saying stuff against Native Americans. I didn't do enough research into that.
But see that I can buy.
Interesting. If you guys want, I can see like what the comments say about Ulysses S. Grant.
Oh, you got the post. You can go through them.
Yeah, I didn't understand like why. So I first of all, I was taking more of like the leftist perspective. To be honest, like when I was viewing these, I was just thinking it was like ridiculous because he kept like bashing leftists and
Oh, so
this
you
per-
just wanted to tee us up for some obvious like dummy lefties, right?
yeah. I was just intrigued at like how he keeps thinking like taking down racist statues are bad.
And he's using this as an example. These like really like egregious examples of. And one thing I do want to emphasize is some of the statues show evidence they probably were taken by like down by like fake people, like white nationalists and people who are trying to like
Yeah, so there's a lot of things going on, and it's not just like
discredit the actual protesters taking down like the racist statues. And like leftist is a big group. It only takes like a group of like a few like like a dozen or few people to take down a single statue. Like you can't use these few bad examples as an example that they're taking down statues that shouldn't be taken down. And I'll be honest, Eliza's is sorry. Continue. What were we saying?
Oh, sorry. No, I just think it was like really. Also, another thing that was really interesting is that that I brought this up is that a lot of conservatives that I keep seeing like make arguments for like these racist statues to stand, right? Like is history. Like I'm sure you guys have heard that too. Like, oh, we need these statues because it showcases history. If not, it'll erase history, and then like black people wouldn't know what happened to them, and yada yada yada. And I just
As American patriot, Indiana Jones once also said to Nazis, "It belongs in a museum."
yeah, so like a lot of people say no, it doesn't belong in the museum. Like I think it should be here, and like there should be a plaque stating like what happened. Like I'll be okay with that, and I'm just like, well, we have book. Well, first of all, like we have books for educational purposes, and then also like statues in and of itself are not for informative purposes or like to kind of glorify a person, right? Like I'm not a fan of statues in any way whatsoever and for anybody, no matter how great of a person he or she might be, because I think that it kind of aggrandizes a person to the point where you forget that that person's flaws.
I've heard people say that in the sense that they'd rather like not have any statues of people and have statues just glorifying regular like achievements, you know, like inventions, like
Yeah, for sure.
things that like society did as a whole. I mean, okay,
I'd be okay with like a statue showcasing like a list of veterans that died for World War II. I'd be fine with that. Like,
I
stuff
mean,
like
I'll be honest. I think when you go far back enough in time, I think any like individual who's like a leader in human history is going to have done something really terrible. I mean, for instance, like Mongolia, they love like Genghis Khan's like they're like he's like a national hero for them basically. Like there's so many things named after Genghis Khan there, but we know Genghis Khan went around with his group of men like raping and killing millions of people all across Eurasia. I mean, there's so much did that like there's clear like genetic markers which can be traced direct paternal lineage to him. I think it's true that that's a good argument you could make against honoring individuals because most individuals in the past just had really terrible, shitty things. I mean, like for instance, Elijah Grant. So I looked up a little bit more about his Native American policies, and I did remember reading some of this, but it does seem like he was very much at the start of his presidency, very much favoring. I mean, for instance, he was like he appointed the first Native American to serve as like Commissioner of Indian Affairs. So actually having someone who was Native American serving in that role. But during his second term, it really fell apart because he kind of lost control. A lot of the people he was commanding and leading led like several like massacres and various like ways they mistreated Native Americans. And it seemed like during the second term, he didn't do as much to actively stop that. Yeah. So I think that's why. Wait, what?
Is that what Ulysses Grant?
Yeah.
That's Eliza's Grant. So that's the specific other type of. Wait, what were we saying?
I think that those are the comments I got too. Like it says, "Dude slaughtered a lot of Native Americans." I'm kind of happy.
Yeah.
He didn't directly do it. More like he.
It sounds like his negligence led to that consequence.
He didn't stop people from doing. I would say, yeah, which isn't great either. But what were you saying?
Nothing. I think just generally, like every president or like every great person who has done something good has done something shitty. Like in retrospect. Like Obama did a lot of good shit, but he also like, like flew drones to the Middle East and like they'll like sent kids back. We shouldn't forget like the good accomplishments that someone does, but also on the other side, like we like glorify it, right? So I think that's like
I think it's similar, especially if someone passing in like a very epic whose life lends to at least some form of epic feeling was Kobe. when Kobe passed away. But I mean, personally, like, I know some people were extremely torn when Kobe passed. But even when I heard about it, I was kind of like, I was still kind of shocked. Just like, because me growing up, Kobe has been just around. He's just been everywhere. He was just someone who's alive. He might as well have been someone who lived down the street from me my whole life. And to hear that he passed, I was like, kind of, wow. But even after he died, there was still debate whether or not he should be honored for his behavior. And then the same conversation we're having now with statues is, how do we compartmentalize the good that an individual did compared to the bad things that people did? But in this case, I mean, if we're going back to, I think the racist statues point of view would probably be Confederates with statues that were put up in the 60s, not historical. And I think a big popular meme right now is, the Confederacy only lasted 4 or 5 years, was it? It's not really this huge heritage. Game of Thrones has more heritage than the Confederacy.
Yeah.
Weren't the Confederate statues like set up in the Jim Crow era?
Yeah, I meant
that's what I heard. Yeah, so they were set up to reinforce like white supremacist
remember
ideals.
Where you're at, boss?
Basically, yeah, exactly. So I think my idea of glorification, I think, is recognizing someone for their achievements because they did like actual achievements, not just like Confederacy, which was like a dead freaking nation we defeated that didn't really contribute to like the things that we really honor today that have built the United States. I mean, there's so many other things we should be honoring so much more, and like Confederacy, there's nothing really to honor about that, I think. And it's like, so like the only thing people are honoring is some like heritage, which a lot of them don't even have. Like there's a lot of random people who like their ancestors mostly immigrated to like the US or entirely immigrated like way after the Confederacy, like decades after, and then they still are like proud of that. It doesn't make sense to me. So I think that came from probably the Jim Crow era influence. But anyways, getting back to the points, I think when we say glorification, I mean this is actually going to be controversial, I think, but I think when we say honor someone, they don't need to be a perfect person. I think honor means, and glorify means, we look at the things they did that were positive achievements that led to good today, but then we cannot ignore the bad things these people did. And that's not really glorification, I think, but like I think that there's I think a way that we can look at certain ideas and certain people for the positive things they did while not ignoring the negatives. I think that by honoring the positive things, it shouldn't somehow take away from the negative things. It's like saying you're like proud of your cultural background or heritage, in the sense that you can be there's a way to not be ashamed of who you are, not guilty for who you are. And you can be proud that you're sort of associated with certain things, but you cannot do that without ignoring the bad things that came with that. For instance, like I'm proud of being, say, Korean and Hungarian heritage. I'm not so proud that there's rampant anti-blackness in Korea and they have very like terrible standards and toxic standards against, say, women, against single mothers, against LGBTQ individuals. I mean, that's really well known. The same thing in Hungary with all these things, plus the fact that I know the ancient the Austro-Hungarian Empire really mistreated a lot of Slavic minorities, for instance, and were very aggressive in assimilating them and sort of like emphasizing like sort of like you had to be Hungarian, you speak the Hungarian language, or you were going to be severely disadvantaged and face heavy discrimination unless if you just lost your identity entirely. So I think that these things I'm going to recognize, I also recognize, of course, like how badly Jews were treated, especially leading up into, they were treated, I mean, they weren't not nearly like the Nazis, of course, but like you can't argue that, for instance, Horthy's government leading up was a very conservative government, which like put the same kind of policies during Austro-Hungary, like the Jewish, you would be disadvantaged if you practiced the Jewish faith, for instance, had to fully assimilate to Christian values and sort of become assimilated, right, to get full rights in that country. And so I think that's like things you have to recognize. Sorry, long tangent, but here's what I'm trying to say. I think is like if you dig deep enough with a lot of these identities, you recognize the good things, but you have to recognize the bad things if you want to be fair, or you just can't recognize any kind of national heritage or identity at all. I don't know. Maybe if one of you has like a different take on that.
I think the most controversial. Honest, Mico. Hello, Mico.
Oh no, go ahead.
Honestly, I think this is most controversial. I feel like in action, people are doing this correctly on a case by case basis. Because if Sorry, I just had food in my throat. I don't know where that came from.
You're eating too?
No, I'm not. That's a thing. I have water. But...
I'm waiting for my pad.
Yes, you know. If people don't want a statue up, then maybe they just don't want it up. And that's good enough reason to not have it up in the first place. But particularly when it comes to the obvious example.
Oh, by the way, I'm not talking about statues. I think statues are really
stupid.
We all in agreement.
Yeah, but I mean, so discussing was good. But when it comes to like the Confederate statues, or even the statue I think in Bristol of the slave driver. I mean, someone who transported slaves.
Yeah. What's his name? I forgot his name. Yeah. He was a really.
I mean, there's also like a king guy. I think that was in Germany. But see, this
Leopold.
is
King Leopold. He was Prussian.
Oh yeah, that
Prussian
guy.
king.
Prussian king. So like these things, people just they want the statue up to get rid of it. In a way, this also
Leopold II specifically. I'm sorry, he wasn't Belgian. He was Belgian. Sorry,
Belgian. Yeah. I know
not Prussian.
It was a mainland. It was etc. But people don't want a statue up. They don't have to have that statue up. And if there's a region that wants to keep up their offensive statue, I mean, who am I to stop it? I'm not going to see that statue. They should probably reconcile with the history for dealing with that. But I think this mostly underscores a broader issue is people's inability to deal with the issues of our past and in our history, that they'll tie themselves so much to the fact that this is their heritage that they'll justify anything about it. Like it's in their DNA that they can't be this bad thing.
They can't accept the negative parts.
They can't accept that. And it is I brought up a friend of mine. He was my Japanese tutor at the time, and he was telling me that, you know, his grandfather or great grandfather was the guy who gave the order to attack on Pearl Harbor. So, I'm just hanging out with his son. I'm hanging out with his grandson. It's like in the cosmic scheme of things, he's just hanging out in America with some Mexican dude. This pretty good friends, and that's pretty good. That's a pretty good conclusion. But discussing how his family reacted, like they don't even like talking about him the way that he mentions it. I know there's also, this is not to ignore the sort of right-wing, conservative, nationalistic sentiments that Japan still has, even though they've done a lot to prevent themselves from falling down that type of road. There's still a recognition that their past has shame in it. And that not only is there shame in their past, that it doesn't need to define them now, the Germans similarly contend with this today. I mean, they ban swastikas, they ban the ability to... They don't want people doing Heils in public, because that's obviously problematic.
Oh, it's a major taboo. Yeah, you don't do that. Like that's...
So my issue would be that America can't reconcile our past the same way.
Well, I think I have a controversial question for both of you.
Ooh.
What would you guys think? Oh, sorry. What would you guys think? You stand on like the statue debate. Like, do you think like taking down more statues is better or like worse?
I mean, I think it'll operate on a case by case basis. I mean, personally, I would not want them.
Because a lot of people have been like criticizing, like Confederate and racist statues. Okay, fine, like right, like even some like right wing centrist people are like, okay, yeah, I should take those down. But then like, why are you also touching statues that are not racist? Like, why are you touching statues that aren't indications of racism or Confederacy, and like taking down statues of the founding fathers? So I think that's also like another issue.
I mean, not to spark another topic, but we still have the play Hamilton on Disney Plus, which is not only just statues but living representations of these people who are also played by many people of color. So I feel like in treating that, I would like to answer that question, but it seems like it'll be so complex to answer how we want to define ourselves, particularly in the context of our history. So I mean, the sort of answer that I gave was, I mean, if people don't want a statue up and it seems like it should be taken down, perhaps these should be probably performed through more democratic means, and
Yeah.
perhaps just if it's just so vitriolic, I could probably ignore some statues of Robert E. Lee being taken down. But for the most part, if I were a politician, I would have to say that people ought to vote for what statues are put up in certain places.
Right, would you be angry at Mount Rushmore being taken down?
Ooh, I mean, Mount Rushmore is an entire different can of worms because it's like what the,
Like their founding fathers, there's like Abraham Lincoln's on there. So I'm just curious.
The main issue, so I should Mount Rushmore, a lot of probably it seems like the bulk, at least the loudest like Native American groups from the area, it's a sacred site for them, and so they wanted to take it down because they said it wasn't put up there with their permission, and they haven't even said they want to take it down necessarily. They just said they want to return that to their own jurisdiction and their own control.
Yeah, it was the six grandfathers. I knew it was the grandfathers. I knew it was a number. I had a feeling it was 6, but I didn't want to get the wrong number.
Something like I don't remember exactly.
I just looked it up.
There's one guy from which tribe was it? I forgot. He's with one of the forefronts of the people trying to take down. He's not taking it down strictly, but
reappropriate it.
He's saying return the control basically and running of that. I mean, more like that mountain to them basically, that area. What was I about to say? I think that's one thing. The democracy sounds like a great idea in practice, but I think the issue sometimes that happens with democracy is sometimes, people, you can't necessarily trust the majority to vote. I mean, because the majority might not really mean much to them, but they're still going to vote against it because they have some slight emotional connection. But it might mean a huge amount to minority, say, some minority group if the statue is given. And so, like, democracy in some cases, or pure democracy, I could see might somehow overrun something which might be even more important to like a minority group than a majority group, and the majority might just vote against it because whatever. So that's, I guess, one thing which I could possibly see maybe against, or somehow maybe a little bit like maybe we don't want to go full democracy, or maybe that might not be as best for interest. I mean, full democracy as in people just vote, and the majority who voted whatever the decision was will do.
Yeah. Well, we talk about that. What's the next